from lily pad to lily pad. If what you want is to stick the landing, then work with me and I'll help you find that right lily pad. Maybe it's a franchise, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's a job and we need to help you move into a different career ambition. But if what you really want to do is own a franchise, stick with me. We're going to stick the landing. From lily pad to lily pad, we will find the right one.
Meg Schmitz, how are you today?
I am well, thank you, Rick. It's great to see you again.
Likewise. Listen, we were just talking about this wonderful balmy weather that we're having. I believe you said you're going to the pool after because it is in double digits in your Wisconsin neck of the woods. Is that correct?
It is. We're on the positive side of double digits. Last week it was 12 below. Today it is 15 above. So we're experiencing a heat wave and pretty excited about it.
Well, take care out there. It can be really hot, out there at that temperature for you folks. Well, listen, I was on your podcast a couple of weeks ago. I really enjoyed it. And through the questions that you asked me, it really perked my interest in having you on my podcast to just talk about your entrepreneurial background. You had some really interesting stories. I went onto your website, did a little bit of research, and I loved it. I mean, you have such a cool, varied background. So for those folks that are listening that don't know you, which is going to be most of certainly my crowd, who is Meg Schmitz? Give us your background.
Okay, well, I was given the nickname the franchise guru by the Wall Street Journal many years ago. I did an interview with them. Also the franchise fashionista. So that out of the way. I earned those nicknames for very good reasons. One, in the world of franchising, going back 30 years, I was a Great Clips franchisee. That was my first business experience, really. I had never had an iota of interest in owning my own business. It was my ex-husband who went to a franchise expo, and we became Great Clips franchisees after that. I really was so amazingly uncomfortable and unhappy with that decision that I did something unconventional and I just sunk my teeth in. I dove in the deep end of the pool. I learned everything I could learn as fast as I could because essentially my husband got us in and he gave up. He gave up very quickly after we got open. And so I spent a lot of time as the co-op president, ran a number of committees. And that really gave me a great exposure to all these business people who were in franchising as well as at the corporate office. And I learned an incredible amount in a very short period of time. And to me, that's really the essence of a gold standard franchise, is to be an absolute newbie knowing nothing. A blank slate, teach me everything. And that's what I got from my franchise experience. After 11 years and 5 locations, I sold those. Offer I couldn't refuse. And there are 3 reasons for that. It looked like Great Clips, acted like Great Clips, and made a lot of money. So it was very easy to sell my businesses at that point. Jumped over to the consulting side. And so back to the entrepreneurial question, I've become a business startup expert, if you will. I've become a multi-unit owner of a business that is not a franchise. And then my husband, I'm remarried, my husband and I do a lot of mentoring for military veterans, entrepreneurs, university students. There are so many great ideas out there. It's a wide and vast world in business, and it never ceases to amaze me, the ideas that come up. So that's a little snippet into my entrepreneurial background.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty varied. And even what you currently do, you blow off steam by working on the farm and being outdoors. And it's like you have the most the world's most interesting woman background, because you have it's varied, right? Your taste, your choices, even your free time activities are things that I wouldn't guess. I mean, you're not going to be the fashionista of franchising and then also like to run a chainsaw in the afternoon. Like that doesn't seem like something that's usual. So I think it just speaks to your diversity, right?
And this is what to me makes people so interesting. And why not take a bite of that apple? Why not try something that scares you? So one of the pictures that's behind me is from a racetrack just here in the Wisconsin area. My dad had a Ferrari at the time, 1967. no hydraulics,
Nice.
completely manual, everything. And I was young but had my driver's license. He let me try driving. It's not an oval track. This is a high speed, high performance driving event. And I was scared to death to go off the track. And sure enough, at one point I did. It's like, is that all it is? This is no big deal. I'm not going to crash the car. I'm not going to die. And so I have really spent a lot of time trying the unusual and learning how to master, maybe not master, Rick, that's pretty lofty, but to be accomplished enough that I can do it safely. Let's call it that. Chainsaws can be deadly, but I'm not a master, but I know how to run a log splitter and drive other manual farm equipment. We don't have a traditional farm. We've got 230 acres of restored prairie. So it's not corn or wheat fields or anything like that, but Midwestern prairie. So we've got a lot of invasive species that need to be rid of. We find that frequently, don't we, in the business world, where there are some invasive species that are not necessarily business friendly as your competitors, and they do a lot to ruin your reputation. So one of the awards that we've gotten here on the farm is the Invader Crusader, eradicating the invasive species here on the farm. So another wrinkle, another layer to the background of Meg that you don't know.
Yeah, I feel like we could just do this part of the podcast for an hour.
Yeah, what did you do that no one would know?
Yeah, interesting facts about Meg for an hour. I love it. Well, was your father an entrepreneur?
He was the opposite. My father, from a very early age, knew that he wanted to be a surgeon. And so he looks at the world through this microscopic lens. Very predictable. If you've ever been in a surgical suite, it's all about predictability, reliability, which in fact is very much the tenet of franchising.
Mm-hmm.
But from the standpoint of where would I have gotten any entrepreneurial genetic code, that really came from my mom.
Okay, and she was an entrepreneur?
In the sense that as a registered nurse, she had care and compassion, and my dad was doing a lot of residency programs in England, and that's where my mom picked up on the hospice movement. And so as her interest in hospice care really gained traction, she realized just how much a lack in the medical field in the United States, the compassion and the empathy for death and dying. I mean, you go back, 50, 40 years from here. So back then, she was really a pioneer in bringing hospice care to the United States. So she was one of the founders, one of the largest hospices in the Midwest area, actually. At age 85, and my dad is now 90, they know what kind of care they will be getting at the end of their lives.
When I was on your podcast, we talked a little bit about this. There was an Australian hospice nurse named Bronnie Ware, and I always talk about this when we have people in for confirmation day, discovery day, whatever you want to call it. It's basically the last step for us to vet the candidates and for them to vet us. And I always talk about, Bronnie Ware, and she ended up, I think she was 30 years as a hospice nurse, probably in the same time frame as your mom. And she came up with she ended up just taking notes through conversations with people in the last weeks of their lives and days sometimes. And she compiled these responses and wrote a book. I believe it's called 5 Wishes of the Dying. But the number one wish is so interesting to me. And it's this, essentially. I wished I'd had the courage to live the life that I wanted on my terms, as opposed to the life that others expected of me. So what can you tell me about what you learned from your mom, and I'm sure some of her stories and lessons for you in hospice, as it pertains to risk taking, and certainly in the sense of like opening a business is a risk. You and I talked a lot about this, when I was on your podcast, but what is your lens on that through maybe what you learned from your mom's experiences?
If you look at my signature, you see the frog is leaping off of the Z in Schmitz. And the frog has been a visual aid, not only for my mom when she used to do public speaking. She would hold up her palms. She would say, from lily pad to lily pad, from life to death. It's the scariest transition any of us is ever going to make. And to have the courage in the end to say, I'm ready, is an amazing transformational thing. Not every dying patient, by the way, meets that point. There are plenty of people who, right until their last gasp, are fighting tooth and nail. And you and I see this. There are people who believe that they would like to own a business, they would like to own a franchise, and yet they can't pull the trigger on it. They can't gain that confidence to do something really scary. And so I hold my palms up as well and say, from lily pad to lily pad, if what you want is to stick the landing, then work with me and I'll help you find that right lily pad. Maybe it's a franchise, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's a job and we need to help you move into a different career ambition. But if what you really want to do is own a franchise, stick with me. We're going to stick the landing. From lily pad to lily pad, we will find the right one.
I love it. Now, let's talk about being a franchise consultant. So maybe describe that role through your lens, because there's a lot of ways, and I've heard the term franchise brokers, which I know is a dirty word. I didn't realize that until I got into the industry. It's consultant. And I would agree with that now that I really understand and see what you guys do. To your point, helping someone transition from lily pad to lily pad, and you're a perfect example. It's an emotional journey, right? You're managing fear, expectations, all sorts of emotions that go along with helping someone identify a great investment vehicle, and sometimes life changing. So, in your terms, what is a franchise consultant? What do you really do for people?
So I think of myself as one of three people all in one. I'm a marriage therapist, a career counselor, and kind of an executive recruiter would be another term. Um, Almost also like a real estate agent. We're going to go shopping. We're going to figure out what your budget is. What is the outcome that you're looking for? Just like working with a patient, a lot of my candidates are not sure absolutely that they want to own a business. So I really rely on my own experiences. Now that I'm 59 years old and have plenty of experience in a lot of different ways, I've been knocked down and dragged around, and some of that's my own fault. And franchising is really here to help people avoid those mistakes, right? Let's not let's not dig a new hole here. Let's find a recipe that works, and let's follow it. So my role as a consultant is to work with individuals and their spouses. My three pillars, I don't know if I would have said them previously: your wife, your life, and your money. Three things. If those are working for you already, then let's make sure that your primary relationship, your lifestyle, and how do you unwind, how do you unplug and disengage so that you can nurture your soul and recharge your batteries. You don't want to own a business, say, oh, I love golf. Well, you don't want to own something that has to do with golf, because now it's going to ruin the thing that nurtures you and lets you decompress. So I'm very careful when I'm working with my candidates to find out about their primary relationship, your wife, your life, and your money. And then we talk about the extent to which they can take a risk alone, because sometimes you get one partner who's much more risk tolerant than the other. But how does that balance work? So I always engage my candidate closely, honestly, and I speak frankly with them, just as you and I spoke last week. It's all about frank discussion and having the candidate express their innermost feelings, desires, concerns, and fears. Because if you can't get them to trust you with those sensitive emotions, then they're going to go boldly into something that maybe they're not being honest about. That to me is a huge set of differentiators from someone who is a broker who says, hey, I got a hot concept for you, check it out. And then
Yeah.
they're gone.
Yeah, that's a great description. I have never heard anyone describe it that way. And I always thought of it that way too, almost like a shepherd. You're helping guide someone, along that path. And it's different for everyone, right? Just based on how they're wired. Like you mentioned, the three pillars that you look at, which are uber important. Yeah, it's super. I mean, great definition, by the way. I haven't heard it quite described like that, but it even gave me more clarity, because you're not just saying, here's a hot new concept, right? You really have to dig in. And what I've found is the better consultants that we worked with, they do that really well, right? And what happens is then when someone will land, say, in front of our brand, they're really a good fit for the brand, because the consultant has taken the time to really dig in with that person. Everything from, investment threshold to risk tolerance to what's a day in the life look like. I mean, everything, right, has to be factored into that. So I really appreciate that from folks like yourself, because it makes my job much easier. And when I get to a candidate who's been referred by someone like you, they're just ready to roll. I mean, it's always a good fit, right? Rarely do we run into someone who's really not a great fit because they've been through this massive process. And if I was getting into franchising, I wouldn't just start looking on my own. I would definitely hire a consultant, right? I would call Meg. And here's why. This is a great story. I don't know if we talked about this on your podcast, Meg, but a friend of mine in the industry always tells a story, and he uses this through the lens of helping someone. As anyone listening to this knows, we're in the fitness space. And so, listening to someone's goals and helping them, same thing, peeling the onion, getting down to the core of really what they want, and then helping them along the way. We're also a tour guide for their fitness journey, if you will, just to be happy, right? Live life to the fullest. And all that's better if you feel good about, literally physically feel good, pain free, and you feel good about the way you look. And sometimes those things are one and the same. But he always described it through the lens of the show, The Amazing Race, because there was a couple that was on The Amazing Race and they won every single time. Even when they have the All-Star show, this couple would always win, to the point where finally the show would not invite them back. And they had a cheat, or a hack, if you will, shortcut. And the only shortcut they used was, typically you would land in like a foreign place and it's rushed and you've got to get from one place to the next and you have to be there in a certain time frame and maybe find things, treasure hunt along the way. And they would always hire a local guide, to help them get there. And that was it. It was that simple. It's like, we're going to land in a foreign country. We're going to immediately grab a local person that seems like they know what they're doing. We're going to pay them a nominal amount. And then we're going to get the shortcuts through the city and find these things that we need. And they have friends that can connect us as well. And it was that simple. And I always equate maybe what we would do for someone in the fitness space. It's like, why go at it on your own when there's so much information out there that can be confusing? But you could say the same thing about a franchise or even investing in any business. And you guys heard Meg say, look, sometimes she doesn't even recommend franchising if it's not a good fit. They do a lot of consulting and mentoring. So if you were thinking of something, why wouldn't you reach out to Meg and get the cheat? I mean, be the greatest race. Hire a tour guide that can walk you through the process and has walked that same path hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of times, to get you there. Do you think that's a good parallel to what you guys do?
The only adjustment I would make to that, Rick, the only adjustment is that I am free. I am like an executive recruiter. So it's a company like yours, any franchise company that's in my portfolio. If we have a successful placement, then I am compensated. But every minute I spend with a candidate, from the beginning, from the minute I meet them, and really I tell them, once you're mine, you're always mine. By text, by Zoom, by whatever, middle of the night, you need something, ups, downs, I am here for you always. A broker isn't like that, or someone whom you've hired. Once there's that final event in that process, then you part ways and you're done. I would say, for me personally, in a very crowded field of brokers and consultants, I have 30 plus years of business experience. I have 30 years of ups and downs. I'm an employer. I lived through a pandemic. I've lived through recessions and really, really good. By the way, business can be equally challenging when you have a really, really strong economy too. So
30 years here.
Yeah. So you and I
right,
have seen a lot of these people come through who have a desire to take control, but do they really have the chops, say, for your concept? Are they the greatest fit for your concept? Sometimes what I find is, in the process of getting to know you or trusting me, my candidate or husband and wife or whatever that might be, but if it's a partnership, generally there's one who gravitates to me sooner than the other. And that's when I start to get the good stuff, when they're really willing to let their hair down, be relaxed, tell me their foibles and quirks. And one of the questions that I will ask people is, forget about your resume, forget about your LinkedIn profile. There were probably episodes in your life that were transformational or formative, something that happened that changed the course of your professional career, your life. One great example, I had a gentleman I was working with who was a banker, and a white collar tie, the round glasses. And he said, I know what you see when you look at me, Meg. You see a banker, but that is not who I am. I said, okay, Mike, who are you? And so he began to tell me the story of growing up, spending time on his parents' dairy farm. And he's milking cows and chasing chickens, and he's got his boots on the ground with his brothers and sisters. And so, as his grandparents were teaching them the ins and outs of a dairy farm, he knew that's what he did not want to do. But he was the only one of the kids that then started to climb the ivory tower. As he said, they pushed him further and further away because he became disassociated with the reality, the boots on the ground, the work of life. And so he made a really great buck, and he was disjointed from his family. He said, I think if I owned a business that could really put me back into contact with my nieces and nephews and give them an opportunity, then I can really get closer to my family. I said, well, what would that look like? What did you really like did you like, the the hard work on a dairy farm? At least it's dairy and you're not killing chickens. But that was part of it too, is you raise your chickens, you have a meal. And he said he hated that part of it, but what he really loved was getting out the chainsaws and getting out the equipment and four-wheel drive. He was a manual guy, just like I'm a manual transmission. And we were talking about how much fun it is to be on the farm. And so I found him a franchise, and he's perfect for franchising, that allowed him to be outdoors where he wanted to be, taking down trees. He bought Monster Tree Service. He's still in business here in the Milwaukee area. He went from 3 territories and expanded into 5 or 6 now. And he's making just as much money as he was in the bank, which was close to $500,000 a year. So he's replaced his income, but he's back salt of the earth and got his family back. So those moments when my candidate tells me something I never would have guessed. Sometimes it's that hard left turn, and I'll say, hang on a second, I've got a different idea for you. So it's not a race. It's not here are 3 choices and good luck. It's week over week. How does this help them realize more of who they are and who they want to be, who they're not right now, and the silo that they're in? If they could break out, what would that look like? So it takes time for some people to really figure that out.
You mentioned earlier the Great Clips event, if you will. Was that the most pivotal? Because you mentioned these pivotal moments in life that sometimes define where you end up or your choices. Was that yours, or did you have another one that was more profound?
The pivotal moment for me is with the Great Clips piece of it, is that because I sank my teeth in and wanted to learn everything I could, I got the attention of the corporate office. And so I was on a committee that met up in Minneapolis, is where headquarters is. We were up there 4 times a year. I was on other committees. We would meet with other groups of people around the country. At one point, I think it was 10 years, it must have been around 1999, Jeff Elgin, who founded founded Franchoice. So Jeff Elgin was leaving Great Clips to start Franchoice. And he said, I see what you're doing with the co-op here in Chicago. You're missing your calling. You're a great owner, but you'd be a phenomenal consultant. You've got that care and compassion. You want to help people do better. I see it with your employees, but you could really change lives of people who want to own their own business. And this is what we're going to do at Franchoice. We're not going to give them just a couple of options. We're going to choose the best of the best in the industry. We're going to represent them like executive recruiters, and we're going to let the candidate figure out what is their landing pad, what's their lily pad. So it was Jeff Elgin really tapping me on the shoulder and saying, let's get you out of here. You make a couple of adjustments and the door is open when you're ready to come over.
Very cool. Yeah, he's a powerful guy. I've heard similar stories about him from many different people. So he's a very influential guy, if you haven't heard of him in franchising. And just, he's really gregarious, outgoing. You wouldn't think that like he's got this other softer side to him where he's so personal with everyone, but he really is. This is probably the 5th instance I've heard where, he really helped someone, and I'd say really help them identify what they would be naturally good at, same as you. But he must have a penchant or an eye for picking out like exactly what personality traits it takes to be good consultants, because Franchoice is really, really good. I mean, yeah.
And that's really the benefit for me being part of this group, is the discernment from the top that we're not going to bring in just anybody. And so I think it's shifted a bit. Now we're at 22 years, I think, since the company was founded. But back then, in order to come in as a consultant, you had to have a reputation in franchising that was squeaky clean. You needed to know all of the vernacular. You needed to know really the tenets of franchising and what differentiates a good one from a not so good one. And he was very particular about those first 2 years, who he brought in to reflect this new business. Well, now here we are 22 years later. And to be an invitation only club today is what keeps our reputation clean. And I believe that companies like yours and the development people with whom you work or have hired, they get bombarded with leads from all these different groups, broker groups, independent brokers, and they know where the quality is coming from. They know either a quality lead or a quality process. Sometimes you get a quality lead, but not necessarily the quality process. So your people know who they like to work with because they get both pieces of that. They get a quality lead and then someone who's going to stick with the candidate through thick and thin to get them through the tough thing about this decision is the emotional element of it.
Always. Yeah. I mean, you can only do so much risk mitigation, which leads me to my next question. What do you think the biggest obstacle is, based on your experience, in getting a candidate to jump from one lily pad to the other and take advantage of what franchising offers?
Chatter. It may be spousal ambush. It may be family who think that they know better. It may be the media. A lot of people with whom I am working right now, right from the minute we start working together, that first conversation, Rick, I talk to them about, what is your fear meter? What does that look like? What have you done that would demonstrate to me or to a franchisor that you are a risk taker? Because owning your own business, even though it's a franchise and you've got a set of rules and you've got the recipe and you know what a good outcome is going to look like, I think the biggest obstacle is the head trash that they get either within themselves, from the media, other people who think they might know better, and foist their own fears and concerns. It's hard for an individual to break through all that without seeing it from the franchisor. And so I think you see that too. Some people just give up before they get there because the other influencing factors are stronger. That worrier, that arcing up, they're a warrior and they're going to do it. And then they talk to their family and they turn into the worrier. So it's that cyclical thing. I can see it happening with some people week over week. And I pointed that out to them. I see this tendency. Do you have the fortitude to get over it? Do you have the fortitude to say yes? But then, Rick, this is also where it gets interesting on your side, or as I'm working with your development people, is to identify those individuals who are shaky and to say, I don't think this guy's got it, or gal. I don't think they've got it.
Well,
I'll pull the plug.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the sort of the gatekeeping event that gets people to our confirmation day is the CEO call. And obviously I'm the CEO, so I'm on that call. And I have some very pointed questions. And it's interesting. I'm comforted, since we're relatively new to franchising, even though we've been, running, again, we run this big licensing business. We've been coaching a couple thousand clubs. So leadership and accountability and risk tolerance, those are all things that we've been dealing with and coaching people on for a very long time. So it's interesting, because I'm happy to hear that, even though we're new to the franchise space, that I ask a lot of those questions on that CEO call, because those are really important to me. I'll ask questions, just things like, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? And it's, and it could be something personal or business related, but you just want to understand, like, have you done anything hard before? How are you wired? Are you going to be resilient? I mean, look, entrepreneurship is much easier in a franchise structure. Everyone understands that, I would hope. And the statistics support your survival rate and your success rate, I should say, are much higher in a franchise structure than if you go out alone, right? 100%.
Yep.
That being said, it's still not for wimps. It's still not easy. You're still going to have some sleepless nights and some moments of doubt. And if you think you're not, you're sorely mistaken, and you're not going to be wired the right way. So we try to do a lot of work. I do personally on these calls, asking those type of questions. And depending on how those answers go, yeah, it might be a situation where I would go back to you, Meg, and say, I'm not really sure about this person. I don't know if they're wired correctly for this role. You can go back and stress test them. And just based on what you've told me about yourself, I'm sure you get a ton of referrals or feedbacks from past candidates who are looking at other concepts now, that type of idea. And if you place them in the wrong concept, or you put them in a situation that's not honest for them, where they're not going to succeed, you're not going to have the staying power that you've had all these years. So is there any way for you, what have you seen that you can help them overcome that loop, that warrior to warrior loop that you talk about? Is there a way that you've seen people overcome that, or a strategy that you use?
Sometimes it works, Rick, and sometimes it's just, let's call the kettle black. We got the elephant in the room. We got whatever analogy you want to use. Can we just have a frank conversation that you're continuing to arc up and back down again? Can you, Susan, can you, Rick, can you identify what is it that continues to bring you down? Is this really what you want? Because if this is scaring the crap out of you, that's okay. You don't need to do this. Look at everything you've learned about yourself over the last 6 to 8 weeks, or however many weeks it would have been that we've been working together. I've had people come back to me 2, 3 times. And I know at that point they're not gonna do it.
Right.
But they have this desire. They're not going to bring it to fruition. It reminds me of a guy I was working with who didn't have a dog, he didn't have a girlfriend, and he didn't have a job. And I can still picture him on Zoom. And I remember looking at him thinking, he's kind of an odd looking dude. So sometimes they present themselves that clearly where you can say, well, let's just stop this right now. Other people clean up really good and they look like they're the right person.
You're so direct. I love it. Oh, you look a little odd. I'm not thinking you're going to be a good candidate for franchise.
What franchise or am I?
Clean yourself up. Call me back when you're ready.
Yeah, who's going to look at them except for
it.
where you got your camera off and you don't ever have to interact with anybody. I don't know where to put a mushroom, but truthfully too, there are people who clean up really well, and but what I can't want is I can't want it more than they do. They have 100%. To want it more. And so when we talk about the elephant in the room and can you get over it, then I back away and say, and I've done this many times, if this is not the right time, if this is not the right vehicle, I am totally okay with that. Let's just press pause. I'll let the franchisors know, take some time to think about it. Let's put a time 4 weeks out and reconvene on this. And if the answer is still no, then that's okay. You've learned a lot. I've helped you to figure that out. And then I also save not only you, but I save me that long-term outcome with an individual who's not the right person in the right place, and they become problematic or challenging for your operations people. It's just a favor that we do to ourselves and to them to say, pausing is just fine.
Yeah, no, I love it. Listen, that's why you hire Meg, essentially, if you're listening to this and you're wondering about franchising. That's why. Meg, if you had one thing that you would want people to know about franchising, a misconception or just a fact or something you find interesting about franchising, what would that be?
The top misconception I get is people think it's all food, and it's not. It's everything but food, if you will. They're industries that are successful. No one ever would have thought of mental health being a franchisable concept. Totally kicking ass out there. Just because mental health is a problem in every community in every corner of our country. Very franchisable model. So it's the top misconception is that it's all food, and it's not. Also, The second one is that you have to have a lot of money. Like it's going to cost $1 million, which it's not. There's so many great investment opportunities that are nowhere close to even $100,000. Now, that said, if you want to make six figures, you're going to invest six figures one way or another. If what you want is real money, not walking around money. So I would say food and then the investment level are the top two misconceptions.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking like, yeah, I would probably have thought that as well before I knew anything about business or franchising, because all you hear about is like McDonald's and it's like $4 million to get in. And, again, these huge barriers, or even, yeah, most of them food related, but very expensive to get in. So I'm glad you said that, because that is absolutely true. Last question for you, Meg. What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Trust your gut.
Really? Interesting. All right. Now, why would you say that?
Well, we're wired up for fight or flight. We're wired up for a lot of other things as well. And if your BS meter is going off, then believe that. If there's one big mistake I made repeatedly, it was that there was that sense of this isn't right, and I probably in the wrong place at the wrong time and shouldn't be here. But I carried it because I'm an immensely curious and engaging person. I will put myself into positions where I have a higher risk than what I was prepared for. And that was problematic for me. So listen to your gut and do your research.
I love it. Meg, if people want to get a hold of you, how can they do so? We'll put it in the show notes, but tell the folks how they can get a hold of you.
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is to send me a text and say, hey, I heard you on Rick's show. My number is 847-302-2601 is my cell phone. I love getting those. I've done some TV programs where right away, as soon as the segment is over, someone will send me a text and say, hey, I saw you on blah, blah, blah. I love getting those. I'm absolutely truthful when I say from the minute I meet you, once you're mine, you're always mine. And I'll help you get to what that lily pad looks like. If you want to do some research, type in my name into your search bar. I'm about 10 pages deep. I'm easy to find, megschmitz.com. But I've got episodes like the free agent podcast that you did with me a couple of weeks ago. Just a lot of great information on the website. And that's the easiest place to go.
You heard her, folks. She even gave you her cell phone number. So give her a shout out if you like what Meg had to say. She's a rock star. Meg, I appreciate it. I know our audience is going to get a ton of value from it. So thanks for doing what you do and for sharing some of your stories. I love it. I love it. Keep up the great work.